You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And happy couple of days after Juneteenth. It's been quite a week. Cops have been charged with murder, deservedly so, I believe. Police departments are being revamped. John Bolton's book has come out. John Bolton could have told the truth back during impeachment, but no. In any event, it's nice to have the confirmation whenever we do get it, but had he spoken up in a timely and legal fashion, we would have had Trump impeached by now. Still, and then there's the court. The court came out with two decisions, the one on gender and gay rights in employment, and the DACA refusing to hear Trump's attempt to overcome the Dreamers and send them all back to places they've never been, as if that was their home and not the states, which is their home. So maybe the court is waking up to what's happening in the streets, the way that police precincts and local municipalities are. Anyway, there's hope in the heart and the horizon. We have a chock full of information show for you today, very relevant and timely in terms of police brutality. What would you say if you knew that the rates of domestic violence among policemen are 40% higher than those in the general population? So think about that every time you hear about one of these murders of black people by police. We have with us the author of a remarkable book, No Visible Bruises, who sourced that statistic and wrote a book about the connections between domestic violence and, well, everything. And there's Fighting Words, and there's Surrealism Corner, but before we get to any of that, we are going to go inside the headlines. We'll start with some shorties to warm up. Employee dissent at Facebook exploded after Mark Zuckerberg doubled down on allowing unfiltered speech from politicians. More than 5,000 employees voted that the company should change the policy, with some staffers even questioning whether Facebook was in an abusive relationship with Donald Trump. You know, whatever else is happening, and although happily firsts and breakthroughs for women are more frequent these days, long overdue, gasp, gasp, we still should not forget to touch that base and name them when we can. I mean, after all, into each one has gone just years, probably decades of work, getting back up after being pushed down, more work, refusing to give up, harder work, getting paid less, and more harder and harder work. So here are two. The Jewish Theological Seminary, the preeminent institution of higher learning for conservative Judaism in the United States, conservative Judaism yet, announced the appointment of Shuli Rubin Schwartz as its 8th chancellor and the first woman to hold the post in its 134-year history. Also, Harper's Bazaar announced its new editor-in-chief, Samira Nasser, who comes to the venerable fashion and literary magazine as the first black editor-in-chief in that 153-year-old history. Congratulations to both intrepid women. A recently released study in the New England Journal of Medicine has focused on gun ownership and gun violence. The study tracked nearly 700,000 first-time handgun buyers and compared them with similar non-owners, breaking out risk by gender. Men who bought a gun for the first time were 8 times more likely to kill themselves by gunshot in the subsequent 12 years as non-owners. Women were 35 times as likely to do so. Male gun owners far outnumber women owners in the study and in life. Previously, public health research on firearms has been limited by political opposition. Do you hear the NRA lurking on that one? But this particular study, led by Dr. David Stuttard of Stanford, was able to break through, and it linked gun purchases to the voter registry and suicide data to track individuals over time from 2004 to 2016. The study also found that women make more attempts at suicide than men do, but use less lethal means. A clutch of highly elite girls' schools in New York City is under overdue scrutiny for racism. Graduates of Chapin, Brearley, and Spence, among other such schools, which typically charge over $50,000 a year in tuition, and which turn out such graduates as Gwyneth Paltrow, Ivanka Trump, and generations of Kennedy women, never issued one statement about racism during the past weeks, which righteously pissed off some of their black graduates. So Miesha Agrippa, Chapin class of 2016, turned her grief and anger into action and posted a challenge to Chapin on her Instagram page. That grew into a movement that spread to other local all-girls schools, where alumni have created similar pages with names like Black Spence Speaks. The graduates related years of micro and macro aggressions at the elite schools, which have now apologized and, more importantly, vowed to hire more teachers and staff of color, rework their curricula toward inclusiveness, like not teaching that Europeans invented history, and to revise codes of conduct to focus more on acts of racism. Meanwhile, in a decidedly non-elite context, 6 adolescent girls, black, brown, white, Asian, all age 14 to 16, founded a group called Teens for Equality. They met on Twitter, and they decided to organize a youth march against police violence in Nashville, Tennessee. Rain was predicted for the day, and it was unseasonably hot even for Tennessee, and they'd never organized anything at all ever before, and furthermore, previous Nashville protests had ended in some form of violence. But these 6 were not to be denied. 5 days after they announced the organizing, they led a perfectly peaceful march of Black Lives Matter protesters, some 10,000 people strong. They themselves were astonished, but they announced it only gave them encouragement to do it again and bigger and better in the future. Let's hear it for Nia Collins, Jade Fuller, Kennedy Green, Emma Rose Smith, Michaela Smith, and Z. Thomas. Yes! It's time for our first break, but we have a busy time ahead. There's fighting words, of course, at the end of the program, and for the conversation, well, there's where we'll learn how we might, as a society, address everything from homelessness to mass shootings if we simply paid some attention to the violence that takes place in private in the home. But before we get to any of that, we need to go into the surrealism corner, which is coming right up. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
The majority conservative Supreme Court actually made 2 humane decisions, and every day more Republican leaders and military men are publicly turning against Trump. Is this still the surrealism corner? I can't resist a couple of one-liners. John Bolton writes that Trump thought Finland was a region of Russia. John Bolton writes that Trump didn't know the United Kingdom was a nuclear power. Trump's running campaign ads condemning Joe Biden for being soft on China, while John Bolton writes that Trump pleaded with Xi Jinping to interfere with U.S. elections and help Trump get reelected. Where is Twilight Zone theme music when we really need it? You remember? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. Jerry Falwell, Jr., that Trump-loving evangelical icon of social conservatism whose father established the fundamentalist Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. You got that. Liberty in Lynchburg. Well, Jr. was recently in the news, if you remember, for so militantly opposing the hoax that was the pandemic that he insisted students return to campus after spring break, despite protests from students and parents who wanted to observe lockdown. They may be fundamentalists, but they're not crazy. Falwell has so far survived demands for his firing by influential alumni, as well as staff resignations, and now an incipient boycott. This last after he tweeted blackface and Ku Klux Klan imagery while mocking the social distancing orders of Virginia's Democratic Governor, Ralph Northam. 4 black faculty and staff members resigned in protest, including the Director of Diversity Retention, surely the hardest job imaginable at Liberty University. But here's a factoid to chill your soul. The Liberty University campus serves 46,000 undergraduates. It's okay if you want to go get an aspirin. Now let's move a bit more south and to the west, to Virginia's neighbor, Tennessee. As calls grow louder to cleanse the nation of Confederate memorial statues, a movement is rising to replace them with the likeness of someone who, for many people, represents the opposite of oppression and hatred. Dolly Parton. Yep, there's an online petition asking the Tennessee governor and legislators to erect statues of Dolly in place of Confederate soldiers, and it's garnered more than 14,000 signatures. The petition reads in part, "History should not be forgotten, but we need not glamorize those who do not deserve our praise. Instead, let us honor a true Tennessee hero, Dolly Parton." Partonists point out that Dolly has supported such causes as women's health care, children's literacy, and helping victims of wildfires, and that she has universal appeal. Parton herself has been careful to stay out of anything remotely political or even, quote, controversial. But she was criticized in 2017 for the Dixie Stampede, a dinner theater-style reenactment of the Civil War, where visitors had to choose to side with the North or the South. The following year, the show was renamed and updated. Apparently that didn't dent the love Tennesseans feel for her. Quote, "Dolly Parton is the one person in Tennessee everyone agrees on," said Lynn Sacco, a professor of history at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, who has taught a course on Parton. She goes on to say, "One of my students called her the Jesus of Appalachia." I do not make these things up. I know you think I do, but I do not make these things up. Now, given what members of a once great Republican Party have become, you'd think all Democrats have to do is sit back, shut up, and roll to victory. Basically, that's what Joe Biden seems to be doing. And it's working. Unfortunately, Democrats are also geniuses when it comes to snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Take, for example, Chris Janacek, the Nebraskan Democratic Senate candidate running against Ben Sasse. Janacek sent a sexually explicit text message about one of his campaign staff members, and, as it turns out, he has also made racist comments in the past. How could the Nebraska Democratic Party let such a character, he owns a local bakery chain, get this far? In a June 4th text, Janacek sent to a campaign staffer and 4 other people, he said that he had discussed a work matter with a staffer and that she had argued with him and walked away. The text then continued, "Do you think the campaign should spend some money on getting her laid? It will probably take 3 guys." He then described in explicit terms what he wanted the men to do to her. Party leaders met with Janacek and urged him to drop out of the race. If he does, party leaders have until September the 1st to choose a replacement. But he so far has refused to drop out, and the party's executive committee unanimously voted to withdraw its support and resources from his campaign. The staff member, who has since quit, filed a formal complaint. But there seems to be no legal process to remove Janacek from the ballot against his will. As for the racist remark, well, at least the first one to surface was, of course, to a woman. Peggy Jones, now an associate professor at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. She came forth to say that he had used the N-word on her years ago, and she had been very upset. Her account was corroborated by 3 people. A former friend of Janacek said that that was all in line with his reputation. Quote, "He had a history of making racist jokes and then saying, 'I'm just kidding,' if somebody got offended by it. A lot of times people excused his behavior because he was a cake maker, so he would always bring cakes to parties. You know, it went, 'He's kind of a racist, but he makes really good cakes.'" Close quote. Oh, well, that explains everything. Really good cakes. Surreal. Time for another quick break, and then we'll be back with the conversation, which, remember, this week is with Rachel Louise Snyder, who has written the book that shows the connections between private violence in the home, the most dangerous place in the world for women, the home, and what's happening in police precincts all across this country, and the connections between that private violence and everything else. That's coming right up. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And now for the conversation. Between the year 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed. During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. 20 people in the U.S. still are assaulted every minute by their partners. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. That's 50,000 women. And despite the growing awareness that men also can be victims of domestic violence, the overwhelming majority of victims, about 85%, are still, today, women and girls. And for every woman killed in the U.S. from domestic violence homicide, nearly 9 are almost killed. The cost in dollars, well, $8 billion and more annually for taxpayers in medical costs and health costs, and causing victims to lose more than 8 million workdays each year. Domestic violence is the first cause of homelessness among women and the third cause of homelessness in general in our country. 54% of mass shootings in America today involved domestic or family violence. We're about to hear from the woman who sourced all of this and much more. Rachel Louise Snyder is an American journalist, writer, and professor who covers domestic violence and who previously worked as a foreign correspondent for public radio, for the program Marketplace, and also for All Things Considered and This American Life. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Washington Post, and Slate. She has previously written the books Fugitive Denim, a moving story of people and pants in the borderless world of global trade, and What We've Lost Is Nothing. And this book that she's going to discuss with us today, No Visible Bruises, is just coming out in paperback. It is the winner of the Hillman Prize for Book Journalism, New York Times Top 10 Books of the Year, National Book Critics Circle Award finalist, Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist, and on, and deserving of every one of those awards and more. Here is Rachel Louise Snyder. Rachel, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a heartbreaking time to have you as a guest on the program, and yet it's so apt. And here we are talking about so-called private violence and domestic violence and your brilliant book, No Visible Bruises. And I can't help thinking how much they're connected. I immediately thought of what that policeman's family life must be like.
Yeah, I did too. You know, it's interesting because I put a little thing out on Twitter the other day. I mean, Twitter is not a great one-off, get it off your chest kind of thing, but it was a Venn diagram of, let's look at the police who are outwardly brutal to black men, predominantly men, although sometimes black women.
Yes.
And let's look at the police who are beating their spouses. Mm-hmm. And then let's look at who's covering for those two groups. And right there in the middle of that Venn diagram, that is who needs to be weeded out. And, I say it in my book that the rates of violence, personal, domestic, whatever you want to call it, abuse in officers' ranks are much, much higher than civilians, about 40%.
Yes.
And yet they are rarely held to any kind of accountability for that. Yeah. And those are often the same people who are doing exactly what happened to George Floyd.
Women being the canaries in the mine. Whatever goes wrong, it happens to us first. They try it out on practice on us. The only difference, I add, the only difference is that the miners usually have the sense to listen to the canaries, and if the canaries go silent, the rule is get the hell out of the mine. Whereas society has not listened to these screams.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what's angering me. I mean, I'm always at a sort of low level of anger anyway over all of this. But, we've been shouting this for 40 years. We've been shouting this for the entirety of my lifetime, a little longer than 40 years. But, and here right now is this moment where we can point to and say, this has to stop. But we're not taking domestic violence seriously at all. There's nothing, I'm seeing nothing about it. And yet, the connection is so clear between domestic violence and all these other types of violence. It is
exactly,
call it the original sin, the original violence. Like, we take domestic violence seriously, and we will begin to see reductions in, for example, female homelessness across the country. We will begin to see reductions in police brutality. We will begin to see reductions in mass incarceration. And I mean, all these, and mass shootings. I mean, don't even get me started on that. So it's so frustrating to me because, like you, I feel like, we're yelling into the void, like, come on, pay attention. There's a light over here,
Exactly. It's so clear after your book, which came out late last year, but it's about to come out in paperback. It's an extraordinary book. It's deserved all the prizes it's won justly, and it deserves even more. But in your book, you make the connections. I mean, not only have you done a crack reporting job as a foreign correspondent formerly, you entered this world, this foreign but right next door world, and with the same skills that you'd acquired for so long, but you write very well as well, which always is a real game. You care about language, and you make the connections between everything, education, economics, crime, racial equality, gender equality, mental health as well as physical health. I mean, there's no way to address any of the problems as a society we have that are so-called public problems without going into this so-called private realm of violence.
That's right. That's right. And, we, when I was writing the book, or even before I started writing it, when I was researching this, I knew immediately it needed to be a book, because nothing existed that was making these connections. And I kept thinking, like, I'm educated. I'm a tenured professor,
Right.
And I'm a feminist, I'm a reader, I consider myself sort of well versed in these issues. And if I wasn't making these connections and never had made these connections between domestic violence and like you name every social issue that we're facing, what was wrong then? Where was the systemic failure? Yeah. And partly the systemic failure was in media, right?
That's right. That's right.
The media wasn't making it. And, in the literary world. And so the book was an attempt to bridge those two things, but it was also an attempt to get people who avidly do not care about domestic violence to read a book about domestic violence. That's really, like, from sentence to sentence, I thought, this is my task. I'm in a country that has 400 years of not caring about this issue.
Right.
So how can I make them read something that is going to be compelling about an issue that they don't care about?
Well, you told stories. That's how you did it. I mean, the story of Michelle and Rocky, the story of, there's no way not to be gripped with the specificity of those stories as you approach the enormity of the subject. And as I say, you write damned well. But I've worked on this issue for 40 years also, and wrote a book about male violence, or violence, and that's a little redundant. Male violence. Wrote a book about it called The Demon Lover on the sexuality of terrorism. It was a book ostensibly about terrorism, but it went in every direction, which is right toward this one. And so I thought I knew pretty much about as much, and I had stupidly, densely never connected it with the statistics on homelessness, which your book, of course, does. There's nothing that it doesn't touch. And, years ago, we battered down the doors of Amnesty International because they had never declared a woman a prisoner of conscience unless she was the wife of a famous man. And we had all these cases of women who were fighting for women's rights around the world, and they were never prisoners of conscience. And it was because their mandate of AI at that time was state violence. And of course, most of the violence that happens to women, and I know, happens at home, happens in the private realm. Yeah. Women live in the private realm. So what you've done is make this unavoidably clear that it's a public issue. But have you seen anybody listening other than the popularity of the book, which will I hope grow even more exponentially with the paperback?
Well, yes, I have, but I also feel like you bring up such an important point that I just want to spend a second on, which is language, right?
Yes,
State violence versus domestic violence. This is the problem I have with the term domestic violence. It's not because I want to be, some pop culture, I don't even know the word. It's that anytime you put the word domestic on something, it softens it. You think domestic versus global issues, right?
Exactly.
And this is the problem. We then we're able to other it, right? We say domesticity is the realm of the woman. That is not our problem.
Exactly.
When in fact, violence against women is a men's problem. This is a men's problem, and men need to be involved in solving it because we're not beating ourselves, right? And we don't rape ourselves,
right?
I have seen changes. They're small. But I think that this is where change actually starts, right?
Yes, it does.
You look at what's happening around the country today, the social unrest, and, historically, I think that our laws and our legislation has always followed social movements and not the other way around. So
Yes.
my hope is that this is the start of what will be legislative change. But, I've because the book has garnered such attention, I have been able to meet with lawmakers. I have been able to meet with influencers and say, look, this is, these are ideas I have. This is what we need to do. And in fact, I'm just starting a project right now with Stanford Law School to try and determine how many women who are imprisoned for homicide are there because they killed someone who was abusing them. This is a number that has never existed.
Yes, although the anecdotal evidence shows that the answer is most.
Yes, absolutely,
Most.
anecdotally, but we've only had one state do one study in this. I do talk briefly about this in my book, and that was New York State. They did a study in, I think it was 2005, and found that the number was 67%.
That's right. Yeah.
67%. So, to me, that is a number that speaks to potential legislative change. Like, what can we do about someone should not be incarcerated because they killed their way out of abuse.
I just wish a copy of this book were sent to every lawmaker, every elected official, and then they were quizzed on it to be sure that they'd read the damn thing.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Wouldn't that be great? Yes, yeah, exactly. Sir, what are the 22 high risk factors? Can you name them?
Right.
And
when I do my talks, I do this little thing where I'm kind of joking around, but I say, how many of you are, domestic violence advocates? How many of you are law enforcement? How many of you are lawyers who've worked on domestic violence cases? And I always get hands up, and then I say, how many of you are judges? And it's crickets, right?
Yeah.
Very rarely. I've had a few. I've had a few judges come and say, my God, this was life changing, but very few. Rarely do they come, and that to me speaks to like a community's first system failure. Like,
yes.
You've got to get your judges involved in these conversations somehow.
Yes, and of course that makes it all the more frightening that the obsession of Mitch McConnell has been to appoint ultra right wing, family. She should stay with him and be a proper wife kind of judges, all up and down the system. So that's another little thing to think about at 4:00 in the morning when one's teeth are gnashing.
Well, look, I'm not the first one to make this parallel, but our current president has all the markings of an abusive relationship to the people he's governing. I mean,
yes,
putting aside whatever he happens in his personal life, like his gaslighting, this is you want a picture of how an abuser operates. Like, there's a great picture.
That's right. The narcissism, the manipulation, the flat out lies, the genius in believing one's own lies, the bullying, it's all there. It's all extraordinary.
And the emotional fragility.
Yes. Oh, yes.
It's so fragile emotionally. Yeah.
Have you found that you cover the men's programs in the book that have been started by former abusers and are range from therapy programs to group programs to some of them trying to be very creative. Do you find that they're really sticking? Because at one point I remember feeling a great deal of hope about them, and then they kind of dissolved or wound up reinforcing a sense of self that was still too tinged with the old self for most of these men.
Well, let me just say I'm reporting on that right now for the New Yorker. It's a big question, and what I would say is we don't have a national umbrella organization for battering intervention groups that has like certifications and accreditation. So states give certifications, but they're all over the board. Right. I have found some really incredible groups. In fact, there's one in Milwaukee that is doing something so unique and so different called the Alma Center, ALMA. I do think that these have a lot of promise, but we don't fund them at all.
Yeah.
We fund our prisons, but we don't fund programs in our prisons to try to make people nonviolent or to try to make them, whatever it is they need. So, they're doing this on shoestring budgets. I mean, I spoke to one just a couple of weeks ago that had gone entirely to donation-based in in the advent of COVID, and they had gotten $200 in donations.
Huh.
I mean, $200. How do you
Takes your
support
breath
10
away.
men and 2 facilitators with $200 in a month? So, we can't. I feel like we can't answer the problem of whether or not they actually change violent men until we actually invest in these programs.
In trying. Yeah.
In trying to actually do it. But I do think, yes, the UK has what's called a response line. I think it's called Response or Respond. And it's a phone line, hotline for men, for anybody who is a violent person and trying to get help. And their calls, their web chats, their texts have skyrocketed by hundreds of percentage points since the advent of COVID. And it flies in the face of what we assume about violent people, that they will not ask for help.
Yes, that's encouraging. That's very encouraging, actually.
It is encouraging. I think people will, they have to want to change, just like anything, just like addiction or whatever.
Right.
But once you get past that big hurdle, yes, I absolutely think change is possible.
Well, that gladdens my heart because, when I first heard of the lockdown, the very first, it was like a knee-jerk reaction. The first place my mind went was, oh my God, if there's a lockdown, the fear and terror and battery and murder of women all over the world is going to skyrocket. And of course that has
it is.
It is.
That is happening.
It is. Yeah.
We don't know how badly, but I can just give you one example. When I interviewed the DA in Milwaukee, there were 58 homicides since the first of the year. That was until the middle of May, I think. That is more than double the normal amount.
Yeah.
We don't know yet how many of those are domestic violence related, but one can make assumptions. So,
well, we know that
we don't know.
We know that, and we know that they're 30% up in Spain. That they were 50% up in France. They're something close to 17% in China, although that's not a certain one. It's just women are being terrorized and beaten and killed all the more in the pandemic.
That's right.
And once released, I would add, one of the brilliant things that you do in No Visible Bruises is point out that, which many people forget, is that there's no end to this for the victims or the so-called survivors. They've survived it. Let's say they've got away. They've tried 6 or 7 times already. This time they make it. It's the most dangerous time of all to leave, which has always been my answer when audiences in Q&A after a speech would say, well, why don't they just leave? The most maddening question of all. The people don't understand that is the most dangerous time of all. When he suspects that she's just about to slip his grasp. But still, even let's say she gets away, let's say there's a quote happy ending, it never ends, because there are cases where he shows up a year, 2 years, 5 years later, and kills her and kills the children. I mean, in a sense, as long as he's alive, or she is, there is this danger.
That's right. They call it keeping your head in the swivel.
Yes.
Right? You're always looking behind you. I mean, this is the thing that is so difficult to understand. I've reported from war zones. I've reported from natural disasters. I've reported from, chaos. And that all has an end date. And domestic violence, even if victims manage to get away,
right,
tends to not have an end date, right? If he does go to prison, then he sits there stewing about how he's going to get revenge. I mean, it's really a problem. And I want to just say on the leaving, that question, just if people can read my book and walk away with one bit of knowledge, it's that women leave. They leave all the time.
That's right.
But leaving takes years.
It
doesn't happen like a suitcase packed at the door, like you're heading off for Vegas for the weekend. That's not how it happens. And I think here's my solution. I think rather than sending men to jail or prison for domestic violence, let's put them in the shelters. We have the shelters already built, right? Let's let the women and kids stay in their home, and then we'll create programming in the shelters for these guys,
This
so
is
that it's not
this is
punitive.
so smart. This is so smart.
Yeah. This is my latest idea. I mean, hey, we've already got the buildings.
Yeah, no, I think it's
And
brilliant.
we've got the curriculum.
Yeah, you write movingly and not surprisingly about guns and the proliferation of guns and the 54% of mass shootings that everybody decries started with domestic or family violence. That's back to the canary in the mine. But you also write tellingly about strangulation and the misnomer that is put on strangulation, and how strangulation or attempted strangulation almost always precedes, that is the penultimate act, and then the ultimate act is femicide, is the killing of the wife or the girlfriend. So you've covered. Is there anything you feel you've missed? I can't find it. I mean, I think it's you covered the waterfront, kiddo.
Yeah, exactly. I did. At in the New Yorker, Masha Gessen, I'll never forget this line. She wrote, "Rachel Louise Snyder has written a book about everything."
Yes. Yes.
I guess maybe that's true. But still there are stories and still there are injustices out there. So I guess I'm not done talking.
Oh, I so hope you're not done talking.
Let me just say, the patriarchy is not serving men either.
Oh,
right?
no.
Men who are violent men end up in jail or they kill themselves most of the time.
Right, yeah.
How is their life being served by the patriarchy either?
Well, it isn't, of course, but it's a temporary frisson of power. And, it's the same way poor white people are taught to hate poor black people, because there's always got to be somebody below you that you think you control so that you don't realize you're being controlled.
Right.
You have shown a light into a very dark corner. And I'm so grateful personally to you and as an activist to you, because this is a book to be brandished as well as to be read and wept over and relished for the language and the clarity. Thank you, Rachel, for being with us, and thank you for No Visible Bruises. It's a very special and important book.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
And it's time for our final break, after which I'll be right back with some fighting words.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, it's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Talk radio with a brain.
Apparently, 3 words that are an obvious statement of plain fact, Black Lives Matter, have become fighting words. For the first time, a spacecraft has sent back pictures of the sky from so far away that some stars appear in different positions than we'd see from Earth. More than 4 billion miles from home and speeding toward interstellar space, NASA's New Horizon has traveled so far that it now has a unique view of the nearest stars, as if one is looking at an alien sky. The difference is due to parallax, the same effect you see if you hold up a finger and close one eye, then the other. It's a shift in perspective, caused in this case by New Horizons' great distance from Earth. Parallax. I love parallax. I named my new novel after it. Parallax changes everything. For example, reportedly, European Americans, approximating the drive toward a shift in perspective, are surfing the internet like crazy for information on Black history in the United States, startled apparently by the idea that there is such a thing. It makes me all the more grateful retroactively for the painful time long ago when black leaders of the civil rights movement told those of us participating white folks to please leave and go organize in your own communities now, sometimes candidly adding that they were exhausted by educating us. Some of us went out to the suburbs and licked our wounds of rejection. Some of us, though, tried to do what they'd asked. And that turned out rather well, for me, certainly, at least. I found a burgeoning, multicolored women's movement, and the rest is herstory. So now, when I encounter well-meaning white Americans, thoughtful, considerate, some even feminist, some highly educated people who were so certain that they've never been racist, it's just that they never got the systemic part, I feel I should go organize in my own community all over again. Apparently I didn't do a very good job last time. I do confess to private mind-bogglement at the ability of such otherwise good people to unsee racism while blithely waltzing through a world filled with Aunt Jemima's pancakes, Uncle Ben's rice, Eskimo bars, Frito Bandito and Chiquita banana ads, flesh-colored Band-Aids, nude-colored bras, Indian maidens on Land O'Lakes butter, and mammy dolls, to name only a few examples. The excuse offered usually dismisses such images as cultural artifacts or leftovers from the 1950s when, quote, nobody knew better. Close quote. Who's nobody, white boy? Also, nobody knowing better was intentional. It was intentional. People were schooled in not knowing better. They still are. That's systemic racism, when you don't see the thing standing out against the background because it also is the background. The myth that racism isn't at work unless it's a Ku Klux Klan cross-burning lynching means that 1,000 microaggressions a day don't count as racism, just as those who claim it's not rape unless 5 men with weapons are violently assaulting one woman. Dramatic extremes are employed as definition, so that the far more frequent, everyday, saturating, soul-debilitating acts that really do define the lives of those of us who are less powerful can skip by unlabeled and unnoticed. White people still actually feel it's okay to post about being colorblind. Colorblindness is nothing to be proud of. Colorblindness on race is impossible and idiotic in a racist society. What white people need to be is color literate, which takes work. Doing that kind of work is scary. I've often thought that at the heart of white racism, the heart of whiteness, is fear. Projected fear based on a deep internal knowledge of what whiteness has done to black people, and on what, if they had a chance, white people would feel and do if the roles were reversed. That fear is what drives, yet claims to justify, ongoing brutality at worst, at best lip service, refusal to pay just reparations, and flight from seeing the truth. I know that many of you listeners are also avid readers, so I've cobbled together what I hope is a helpful short list of really compelling, beautifully written books on American racism, all with female authors and most focusing on the history of women in this country. The authors have all been guests on this program, and each of these books have been discussed here at length, along with many others on this and related subjects. You can find those conversations in the archives. But warning, once parallax shifts your perspective and changed everything, you might get so angry at the lies you've been fed and the way you have consistently acted out of information you swallowed, you'll want to explode. Many people think of slavery in the United States as an aspect of the 19th century Deep South. But from the very beginning, slave trading contributed to the rapid growth and economic success of the northern colonies. It wasn't Virginia that first legalized slavery in the colonies. It was Massachusetts in 1641. By the middle of the century, more slaves inhabited the North than in all of the Chesapeake. By the 1680s, over half the ships up and down the Boston coast were intrinsically tied to the commerce in Caribbean rum, sugar, and slaves. That's a book by Wendy Warren called New England Bound: Slavery and Colonization in Early America. The late scholar and women's studies professor Elizabeth Fox Genovese, together with her then-husband Eugene, authored Fatal Self-Deception: Slaveholding Paternalism in the Old South. It's an important book to get inside slaveholders' thinking as they became preoccupied with presenting the institution of slavery as a benign, paternalistic structure in which slaves were content, even happy, with their fate. This romanticized version of life on the plantation, the kind of thing that saturates Gone with the Wind and other sentimentalized presentations of atrocity, grew from the necessity to morally justify a system of rank exploitation. In other words, they knew what they were doing. A book that falls in what we might call the category of the unbearable whiteness of being is by Carol Anderson, called White Rage: The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. It deservedly won lots of prizes for its unflinching expose of how, every single time since 1865 and the passage of the 13th Amendment, African Americans have advanced toward full participation in this democracy, white reaction has ignited a deliberate, relentless rollback of any gains. Professor Anderson links historical flashpoints from the post-Civil War Black Codes to expressions of white rage after President Obama was elected, and that helped Trump, of course, and she renders visible the long lineage of different names under which white rage hides. This next book delivers shock on shock, even to those who thought they knew something about the subject. The title is The Price for Their Pound of Flesh: The Value of the Enslaved from the Womb to the Grave in the Building of a Nation. It's by Taina Rami Berry, professor of history and African diaspora studies at the University of Texas. This is a book you read with a stiff drink at your elbow, and it's worth it. The research is stupendous. In life and in death, enslaved human beings were commodities, their monetary value assigned based on their age, sex, health, and market demands. A pregnant woman bought more at market price, after all, 2 for the price of 1, and it meant she was fertile for the future, including from rape, and the law sanctioned slavery through a woman's womb. So it's no surprise that careful attention was paid to female slaves' gynecological health. The so-called father of gynecology, Dr. James Marion Sims, conducted his research on enslaved women, sometimes performing hysterectomies or experiments on them without anesthesia because the anesthesia was expensive, and after all, they were only slaves. Every aspect of an enslaved person's life was commodified. Even in death, you were a product, via a highly efficient and organized domestic cadaver trades connection to 19th century medical education. Few scholars until Rami Berry have paid any attention to what she refers to as the ghost value of deceased enslaved people's bodies. By the way, although slavery formally ended in 1865, the trade in deceased African Americans, many formerly enslaved, continued until the 1880s. When the brain finally balks at the statistics, at the different prices listed for different ages and infants and adolescents and sexes, at the scope, at the enormity, the heart needs a specific story with a face on it. Erica Armstrong Dunbar, distinguished professor of Black Studies and History at the University of Delaware, has written such a story in Never Caught: The Washingtons' Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave, Ona Judge. When George and Martha Washington moved from Mount Vernon in Virginia to Philadelphia, which was then the nation's capital, they brought 9 enslaved people with them. Slavery in Philadelphia was looked down on, though, and there even was a law requiring slaveholders to free their slaves every 6 months. But clever, honest George thought he would circumvent the law by sending his slaves back south every 6 months, thereby resetting the clock. Martha's chief attendant, Ona Judge, a young woman who had been interacting with Philadelphia's sizable free black community, figured this out, and before she could be sent back to the plantation to be reset, she ran. This is the only book that examines the life of an 18th century fugitive woman in detail, and it certainly provides a parallax view of the father of our country. Professor Dunbar was researching a different project about 19th century black women in Philadelphia when she came across an ad about a runaway slave in the Philadelphia Gazette. The fugitive in question had escaped from the president's house. Dunbar followed that thread to Ona Judge through 50 years of fugitivity, after which Ona finally granted interviews to 2 reporters for abolitionist newspapers. Her voice is carried through in this book. Annette Gordon Reed, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Hemmingses of Monticello, is, of course, the Jefferson scholar who brought us the truth about Sally Hemings, with all the attendant ironies intact about Jefferson having been so committed to the rights of mankind. The complex truth about visionaries like Jefferson and Washington, slaveholders along with Madison, the father of the Constitution, are ironies brought out by these authors, who are not interested in denunciation and thus lower defensiveness in white readers, but they're interested in how the compartmentalization worked. It's a lesson that desperately we need to learn still. Wherever you enter this world, this buried history, this other reality, it's a parallax. The stars will never look the same again. It changes you forever. If you are a woman or man of color, you come into your own. And if you are a European American, that kind of change is a very good change indeed. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.